Welcome into this edition of the Husker247 podcast. I'm Mike Schaefer, and today I am joined by 24/7 sports analyst Carl Reed joining us here on the program. I'm going to talk about the Nebraska job. Going to talk about Nebraska recruiting with a guy who has been through the Memorial Stadium car wash with recruits before. He knows what it's like here in Lincoln. He is from the Bermuda Triangle of recruiting that it's been for Nebraska for a while in St. Louis. He might even have some answers in that regard. But most of all, we just want to talk about Nebraska football and where things sit right now. Carl, welcome to the program. Great to have you on. Great to have you here with us at 24/7 Sports. I believe I just saw you're now full time riding with us here at 24/7.
Man, it's great to be here with you, man. It's great to talk Nebraska football, a storied program looking for a new head coach. I'm excited to be here with you on your show, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of just dive into this right away. I mean, you had a long, successful career coaching high school in St. Louis. I mean, you know all the power players in that area. You've known a lot of the great prospects in that area. I'm sure you're very familiar with Marcus Washington on Nebraska's roster right now. One of the transfer guys that have helped them out a little bit here early in the year. So Nebraska is not a program. For some people, Nebraska is a television program, like one that kind of like the X-Files, you know it from the 90s, and maybe that's how you know Nebraska. It's changed a lot since their heyday, but you're familiar with that because you've been out here to Lincoln, you've taken these sort of recruiting visits. When you hear, Carl, that the Nebraska job is open, independent of what you've seen the last few years and their lack of success, is this still, to you as someone who's been around football and have been around college football as long as you have, is this still a big job? Does it still have like a cachet to it, or is it fading a little bit?
Well, it's faded some, and it has to because it's been a really long time since Nebraska has been a powerhouse. We talking mid to late '90s, when it was the most relevant program in the country. But I do think that Nebraska can still win big if they hire the right guy and kind of go back to their roots a little bit. And I'm not just talking necessarily triple option football, but run heavy, big lineman, big defense, recruiting more for the region of the country that you're in and the players that you can get, as opposed to what I think a lot of colleges have made the mistake of doing the last decade is trying to go wholesale into the passing RPO, thing that everybody's trying to do because it's really tough to recruit to that. And so you have to think every time you're looking at a job or anytime you're looking at a program, you have to first think with recruiting in mind because the kind of kids that you can recruit is going to determine how good of a program you can be.
And Nebraska's recruiting area just locally. I mean, you're talking. It's been a good run in the state, but you're still probably talking a cap of at most 8 to 10 guys that could be Power Five players, and that's in a really, really good year. More than likely, somewhere from 3 to 5, and so that's in state surrounding areas: Iowa, Kansas, the Dakotas, Colorado aren't areas where you're going to go load up. Missouri's a really good state, but Missouri is pretty heavily recruited right now. So, I mean, do you think Nebraska's next coach has to have the ability, in addition to going outside the region, but they have to be able to win over the coaches in the Midwest at this point in time?
I don't think, I think one of the most, I talk about this a lot. I think one of the most overrated things in recruiting is winning over the high school coaches. Who you shouldn't care about the high school
All
coach
right.
because the high school coach, in a lot of cases, some of the guys will try to hold you hostage in recruiting, and they want to be they want to be stroked a little bit and all of that. The high school coach very rarely has any impact on what school the kid ends up going to. There's maybe 5 to 10% of high school coaches in the entire country that have enough cachet to influence a kid's decision, when he's making the school. I think more colleges waste more time on dealing with high school coaches in recruiting. And I think it hurts them. I see it kill guys every year. You're meeting with the high school coach, you whining and dining them, you putting on these clinics for them, and then the kid ends up committing somewhere else. You haven't spent any time with the kid. You haven't spent enough time with the parent. Like the high school coach is typically in recruiting going to be one of the biggest wasted times that you can invest on. And that's unpopular. And I've been a high school coach. I've been a championship level high school coach. That's guys get upset when I say that. But if you're really looking at it just for exactly what it is, that's the truth. There might be 3 to 5 high school coaches in every state that you need to know really, really well that produce a lot of players, and maybe they have some influence, but in terms of having to sit down and kowtow to every high school coach in a state on a region, there's not a bigger way to waste your time as a college coach, in my opinion.
So then in that sort of theory, anybody who Nebraska hires should at least have the ability to recruit the Midwest, whether they have the prior relationships or not.
Yeah, well, great recruiters can recruit anywhere, right?
Mhm.
So if you look at Lance Leipold, what the job he's doing in Kansas now, and obviously he was at Wisconsin Whitewater, but he didn't know anybody in Buffalo, New York, when he was at the University of Buffalo, and he went up there and recruited just fine. Recruiting is about honesty, integrity, um, talent identification, the ability to make sure that the players can fit your system. High school players will always want a football scholarship. So I think that being from a place, I think that's a over. You don't have to be from a place. Urban Meyer wasn't from Utah, but he went up to the University of Utah and won. He's from Ohio. Then he went to the University of Florida and he won big at the University of Florida. Like he wasn't from those places. He had no
Mhm.
prior history of being at those places. He was an Ohio guy, Midwestern guy, coached at Notre Dame, coached Bowling Green, Cincinnati, that area. But he went to Utah and he killed it on the West Coast. He went to Florida and he killed it on the Southeast. So I think special guys are going to be special no matter where you drop them at.
How much of it? So this is one of the big things that I've been trying to decipher. Talking with guys in our network like Alan True and Steve Wiltbong and others. How much do you, as a former high school coach, now as an analyst, how much do you think it matters if a head coach isn't necessarily one of the best recruiters? I mean, because they have so much other things going on. Isn't that partly why you assemble a staff of guys that are really good recruiters? I mean, a head coach has to be involved, but he probably doesn't have to be the biggest workhorse on a staff either.
I think that the head coach has to be the most significant recruiter on the staff.
Oh, all
I,
right.
I don't think that he needs to be a great X and O coach. You can hire guys that are coordinators that can do that. But when it comes to recruiting, you have to be excellent because you're going to be the biggest constant there. Because your assistant coaches are going to come and they're going to go. Your coordinators are going to get other jobs. Your position coaches are going to move. So when it comes to recruiting, which is the lifeblood of the program, your head coach cannot slack on recruiting. That he has to be able to, when it comes to a recruiting standpoint, take the lion's share. Because as a parent, as a player, the head coach is going to be ultimately who you play for. The position coaches are going to change all of the time, but you're hoping that the head coach is a constant. And so you don't want to be in a situation where you lose a coordinator, lose a position coach, and then you don't know what the hell is going on from a recruiting standpoint.
When you were a high school coach and you go on these sort of recruiting trips, I mean, did you uh, how how genuine do you feel like most head coaches are when you're out there? I mean, did you feel like a lot of it's an act? Do you feel like a lot of it's sincere? Is it 50-50? Is it 75-25? I mean, just because you're dealing with a lot of people, and usually you can kind of tell when you feel like you're getting someone's interest, or if you're just getting someone who's just kind of trying to slide you along. I mean, do you get a good sense of that when you were a high school coach?
If the player ends up playing great, the love is real. If the player ends up not being a good player, then it's all eyes. So it's going to come down to how good was the player. If your player went to a school and he becomes a very good player, then all of that family talk, all of that 40-year decision over 4-year decision, all of that stuff is going to matter. But if the kid doesn't end up panning out and he turns out to be a guy that doesn't contribute, you're going to probably be at odds because they're not going to deliver on most of the promises that they made. That's 90% of the coaches in the country.
So it's just as simple as if they go there and they play well, everything works. If they go there and they don't play that well, everything's a question.
There you go. It's just about and you have to be careful to not get emotionally spent in that. If the kid is a stud, every time you call, they're gonna pick up the phone, right? But if the kid ain't a stud, you might call and they might have your number blocked. It's just that kind of business. And it's so much pressure to win, to be honest with you. In some cases it has to be like that.
Yeah. What do you remember about Nebraska when you were out there for various, whether it's junior days or unofficial visits or what have you? I mean, what do you remember of that place and is it in what ways? I mean, if you can even get this deep with it, like, do you think there's changes or anything needed as it goes about recruiting, that kind of thing?
It's a fan base that wants to win badly. And that when you think about the fact that Nebraska still sells games out every game without having any on the field success, that says a lot to me in itself. And I think that Nebraska fans are just starved for a winner. You know, everybody wants to be like the Tom Osborne days road. That's tough to do because some circumstances have changed and it's not the same landscape of college football that it was then. So I don't know if you can do that, but you can be very good. They can compete for Big Ten titles, which would put you in the mix for national titles if you get the right guy.
Do you as we kind of talk recruiting here before we dive into some of the names that would interest you and everything else. uh, as you look at Nebraska's attempts into St. Louis, when Nebraska was attempting to recruit your players, I mean, eh, how does that school have any kind of name value left in the St. Louis area? I mean, it's Trey Bryant is like the last guy prior to Marcus Washington that I could think of that they picked up in terms of a commitment and had actually played a little bit on the field. Unfortunately, Trey had some knee injuries, and that sort of cost him his career. But it just feels like an area where Nebraska has had a lot of success in the past. They just, no matter the coaching staff, Pelini's, Riley's, or Scott Frost, they just weren't able to build anything in the St. Louis area.
It's tough because so many people are recruiting in St. Louis now, right? Probably 15, 20 years ago, you had the Big 12. Once Mizzou went to the SEC, it kind of changed the recruiting landscape here because everybody in the SEC started recruiting it. Man, you got Ohio State recruited. If you're a big time player in St. Louis, I just think you have so many options that I don't think it's anything that the University of Nebraska did or didn't do. I just think that it's hard as hell to get a kid that Urban Meyer wanted or that Nick Saban or that Dabo Sweeney wanted him. And if those guys at those blue bloods really want the kid, I think it becomes extremely difficult for not just Nebraska, but for anybody to sign the guy.
Yeah. You wrote something regarding Deion Sanders, who I don't think is a real candidate for Nebraska, but I think it's interesting just in the general sense. You wrote about how both with Georgia Tech and Jackson State, Georgia Tech being the most recent job to open, and Jackson State, where Deion's at right now, about their commitment to football and their interest in being an actual football school, and that would speak volumes to Deion himself. Leaving Dion out of it, the fact that Nebraska is very much committed to being a football school, has the resources, has a new facility coming. Is that like an attractive trait to potential coaching candidates? Because you know that you're going to have that sort of support behind you that you maybe won't find at other Power Five schools that might have a little bit more of a recruiting base that's built right into it, but they don't necessarily have the support. I mean, you were talking about the fans earlier. Is that like the attractive part of Nebraska's job?
It's one of them. It's also you have an administration that wants to be good. You have you have the legendary Tom Osborne is still alive and he wants Nebraska to be good. Warren Buffett wants the Nebraska Cornhuskers to be good. There's nothing that you could need as a coach at the University of Nebraska that you couldn't get if you asked for it. Now, there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure for you to win and win big. So, but like the great Vince Lombardi said, the most competitive games will draw the most competitive men. And so you need to decide if you want to be a guy that's held accountable for winning championships, because that's what the standard is at Nebraska. And you have to be willing to embrace that. So I think for the money they can pay a coach, I think for the money that they could pay a staff, all of the amenities in terms of facilities and weight rooms and all of those things. I think the NIL participation, I think Nebraska's positioned very well to compete, but it all comes down to, do you hire the right guy? The coach that you hire is going to determine the trajectory of your program for the next decade, because it's hard to recover from a bad coach, right? And it's really hard to lose when you got a damn good one.
Yeah. So with all that being said, this job's now been open since September 11th, I believe. Who kind of stands out to you? If you were Trev Alberts, who would sort of be on your short list based on just kind of what you know of the college football landscape and the coaching landscape in general?
I would make Lance Leipold tell me no. I think that he's arguably one of the top college football coaches in the country. Obviously, if you follow football at a deep level, which most people don't, you know about his success in winning 6 to 7 Division III national championships. You know, you go to a place like the University of Buffalo and win the MAC. And obviously, he has the University of Kansas undefeated, which is unbelievable in itself. And he's a guy that has Midwestern ties, Midwestern values, and he's an excellent, excellent football coach. I make him tell me no. I also I call Matt Campbell, who's another guy that I think is an incredible leader, a visionary, a leader of men, and what he's been able to do at Iowa State and making that program relevant is kind of remarkable. And I also look heavily at Jeff Monken, the Army coach, who is a great triple option coach, which is Nebraska's roots for when they were very good in being an option powerhouse team. Monken is from the state of Illinois. He's another Midwestern guy that knows how to recruit the area. In addition to those three guys, schematically, though, and having schemes that would fit, they are all great leaders of men. They would be able to hire the right staff. They would be able to recruit the right guys and develop them to be able to have success at the University of Nebraska. And that's where I would start my search if it was me.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the interesting thing with Lance Leipold, I was talking to Alan True about this. He's changed sort of his recruiting identity because you mentioned up in Buffalo, it's not like he had connections up there. I mean, they went up there, he had to build them, he had to hire guys, but they were still recruiting in the hundreds, sometimes, I mean, as low as in the 130s, just based on the type of kid that they could get to go to Buffalo. That's changed a little bit in Kansas. He's got them at a much better level than where they had been at previously. Do you think that regardless of who ends up as Nebraska's coach, that they have a setup and a program where they should almost universally be a top 40 recruiting team every year?
I don't know that they should be a top 4. I think you have to find the guys who fit your system. They weren't top 40 teams when Tom Osborne was there in terms of recruiting. They weren't setting the world on fire with the guys they were recruiting.
They were still getting parade All-Americans and guys of that nature.
They got a handful, but it wasn't like what Alabama and Georgia is doing. You know, they had a great walk-on program. They got incredible linemen from some small towns and within the state. You know, they built it. I think that one of the thing about recruiting rankings that people always have to be careful of is sometimes you need to just get a good football player that fits what you're trying to do, regardless of where he could be ranked. You shouldn't be trying to catch other schools in recruiting rankings. You need to be trying to catch schools on the football field on Saturday afternoons.
Yeah, that's a salient point for sure. All right, so the last kind of question I have, and this sort of pertains to Nebraska's season at hand. They're 1-3 right now. You still have 8 games left. Does this job look dramatically different to a coaching candidate if Nebraska is 4-8 versus 1-11 versus 6-6? Does the result of this season matter at all as they go forward to try to hire this next coach?
No, I don't think so because whoever comes in is going to flip the roster anyway. I think that the players need to be more concerned about how well they play and the focus they have the rest of the season. Because if you just lay down and don't contribute at all and you start doing the me thing, whoever comes in next is going to run you out of town anyway. So the players are playing for their life because they all won't be able to just leave and go to another Division I school the way they think. So they need to be trying to play well, put good film on tape, and have a lot of success for themselves.
All right, Carl, we appreciate your time today joining us here at the Husker247 podcast. We'll have you on maybe a little bit closer to when a decision could be coming in November. If you had to make a guess right now here, September 26th, 1:28 p.m. on a Monday, who's your guy? Who's Nebraska's coach on January 1, 2023? Is it Lance Leipold?
Lance Leipold. I would bet. I'd put my heads with my bets on Lance Leipold.
All right. Appreciate it. Appreciate your time. Everybody listening here at Husker247 podcast, be sure to check out Husker247.com. Plenty of coverage leading up to the Indiana game on Saturday. We'll still have a couple more podcasts coming this week as well. Nebraska is going to have official visitors for the first time this year, this weekend coming up. So we'll have a visit list a little bit later this week, dive into all of those players too. So be sure to check out Husker247. Got deals going on right now. If you are not a VIP member, this is the time to dive in. We'll have plenty on the coaching search as well. Carl, once again, appreciate your time. And I'm Mike Schaefer. We'll be back with more Husker247 content later this week.